into debatable territory, at least you have a two-way hand. But really, this is a good spot for me to raise a knowledgeable Omaha 8 player, but with him, I really had no idea if he's played any Omaha, so I decided not to. Then on the river, I decided to make a very, very thin call with King-Queen because all the draws missed, and again, it might have even been smarter to bluff raise to get him to lay down like ace, ace deuce 4-5 or whatever. But I did think most players who come from no limit think a lot in terms of equity. I mean, it's basically I think he would have raised pretty often if he had a ace and a wheel card or ace and multiple wheel cards pre-flop. So I did think there was enough chance he just had this complete kind of air by the river, a big wrap that a wrap that missed with no pair and no ace high in it. So again, probably two spots on the river where I've botched it already. Bluff raising that Raz hand when I should have called, and calling here when I probably should have raised. But anyway, I thought this was a pretty interesting hand. Here I pick up one of the biggest hands you can possibly pick up in Omaha 8 or better, and flop a monster. And I'm just going to bet. There's nothing that can really stop me. Even getting counterfeited on the turn gives me aces up with a pretty decent low. And that's a good card because, if he had like two pair on the turn, and I just outdrew him. And I do get to scoop it. And another monster, re-raising is definitely a legit option, but I opted to call for deception. I find that I get a lot of action in this spot when I call, and then flop a two-way hand. People often jam a one-way low hand against me, reasoning that if I had a really good low hand a lot of the time, I would have re-raised pre-flop. Instead, I semi-bluff because two high cards flop, and this is the kind of flop that can crush the pre-flop raiser's hands, meaning can really miss the pre-flop raiser's hand, I should say. So I can get him to fold on a lot of high turn cards. He doesn't. He calls, and I just decide to give up the bluff on the river, and I get evidence number 2 that he played his hand pretty well. I'm going to show you that hand, but he had Jack, Jack, King, and he actually turned the nuts. Or possibly the flush got there, so it didn't make sense to raise. But again, he played his hand smartly, although I think maybe a little passively. And I guess maybe I don't take a look at the hand. But anyway, he had Jack, Jack, King, so he had a King high straight on the turn. I guess the clubs got there, or the flush got there, so he didn't raise. But I also think he could have played well and on the passive side, and he could be sort of playing it a little too much like you would play no limit when your opponent's range is kind of polarized. In limit games in general, definitely in Omaha 8, there's a lot to be said for just betting for protection or raising for protection. So anyway, that's what I was thinking. He ought to play it a little faster. So I'll keep an eye out to see if he calls too often and tries to rope it out me too often. That will also help me. There's a lot of spots where it'll really be great if I know I can semi-bluff with no fear of getting raised by his medium made hands. This time I go for a check raise on the two high card boards. As you can see, I put a lot of pressure on boards with two high cards when I'm out of position, and when I wasn't the preflop raiser, rather. He calls, and I don't get. Unfortunately, I get a low card turn. I'm hoping to win a lot on high card turns or pairing the board also. But I do get a card that gives me a pretty nice draw. A 4, 8, or ace will give me a very strong hand. I guess a 4 would be the best card. And an 8 would be pretty good too. I catch one of them, so I just lead again. In case he has like a high pair, he might decide not to call down when the spade when spade gets there on the turn. I've done enough bluffing and getting out of line that I just decide not to even play that hand, deuce, 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 6. Sometimes in position, even with a hand like that, you could play counting on some fold equity on low flops, but I just decided it wasn't good timing for it. Smith Roger is pretty sticky in these stud games, I'm finding out. He plays pretty tenaciously, and I think that's a good thing. Here, it just seems like there's too many things that could have just missed and could be sort of making one last gasp call, but then on 6th Street should fold, and of course I make the nuts on the river and bet it and win. He did make, he just had one pair the whole way. Probably he had 7s in the hole. Full tilt switches the cards around, so it's not guaranteed, but he probably had 2 7s in the hole. Picked up gut shots and again decided to call down. I think his play is reasonable on every street. Basically, I'm seeing that this guy, so far he plays pretty well. He plays pretty well. Maybe on the passive side in the limit games, but he might be just in the feeling out process. So I was questioning whether to keep playing him as we got near the big bet. I was certainly going to play him one cycle, but if he's not a spot and he's an expert no limit player, and I bought in deep, which was probably not. It was just kind of an automatic thing for me, but it maybe was not the best decision against someone who's so successful. Here I make kings up on the river and decide to check it because I just think his most likely hand is a flush draw, based on the fact that he re-raised me when I raised his bring-in with I have an ace up, he re-raises. Okay, some players will do that occasionally with a pair, but I have a 6 in the hole on 3rd Street, and anyway, it's more likely that he has like a flush or straight draw. Really, it's more likely he has a flush draw. I think he's way too out of line here with 5, 6, 7. Although I do think there's some merit to it because people, on the one hand, people are thinking, basically you can think, I'll get a lot of credit when I'm re-raising him when he raised with an ace up, while I shouldn't have it that much since I should raise 100% of the time I have an ace showing, so I have basically 2 random cards in the hole. So it's not the worst kind of thinking, but I do think people overdo it in these heads-up stud games. Anyway, so based on the fact that he re-raised with a 6 up and I had 6 in the hole, I think his most likely hand was a club draw. Then on 6th Street, he called down as my board got stronger and stronger, indicating he maybe picked up something, maybe a pair of queens, probably not. Maybe a straight draw with the 5 to go with it, and then with the 4 clubs on 6th Street, I really think he very likely has a club draw. So even though I make kings up on the river, which is normally good for a value bet every time, I decide it's smarter to check and call. I do expect him to value bet 2 pair anyway, since he would expect me to bet aces up probably. So it's actually a pretty slam dunk check. Just a little odd to be betting the whole way with 6s and then make kings and 6s, which is obviously a much stronger hand, and then check. He doesn't bluff though, which is wise, since obviously I'm rarely ever check folding, and if I was, I probably couldn't beat a pair of 5s. I think that was a little too out of line to get, in my opinion, 5, 6, 7. He should just muck it on 3rd Street, or maybe call the reduced price when I complete the bring in, and if he improves on 4th, then continue. But he should fold 4th Street for sure. Here I donk 4th Street because nobody ever does that when they actually have a pair of aces, and then he raises and I decide to just call. My plan gets foiled a little when, although he does make a nice check behind to be safe, I guess, on the turn.